Bipartisan push. With Congress in session again, President Trump is cutting deals on both sides of the aisle. Immigration debate.
As the DACA clock is winding down, faith leaders praying at the Capitol with dreamers here sharing their stories. I'm Jason Calvi. I'll tell you more coming up.
Back to work. The Holy Father picks up his weekly talks at the Vatican. We'll let you know how he's doing after an injury in Colombia. And Sister Act. A nun with a chainsaw is creating a buzz online in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 13th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Go, Congress, go! President Trump tweeting that message to lawmakers as he makes a bipartisan push for support on tax reform. How's he doing it? Dinners and deal-making with Democrats. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump is having dinner tonight with Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. They'll be talking about the legislative agenda, specifically tax reform. It's the latest attempt by the Republican president to work with his adversaries.
I'm pleased to welcome this bipartisan group.
The president and a bipartisan group of moderate members of Congress huddled today. His message to them, the need for tax reform.
That is pro-jobs, pro-growth, pro-family, and pro-American. It's very simple.
Today's event at the White House included 8 Democrat lawmakers. It's the latest example of Trump's bipartisan push. Last night, Trump dined with Republican and Democrat senators in the Blue Room. The focus, again, the tax overhaul. The White House is calling the meeting highly productive, and one Democrat who was there agrees.
They were very, very accommodating and understanding where we were all coming from. Heidi was there. Joe Donnelly was there. Everybody had input. John Thune was there, and we had Pat Toomey was there, Warren Hatch. It was just a great meeting.
President Trump prides himself on being a deal maker.
He'll cut a deal to get it done.
Steve Bell, a policy expert in Washington, says there are many opposing views on Capitol Hill on tax reform. But Bell says the president could be effective in reaching across the aisle.
Going to Chuck Schumer, whom I think may become one of the most important members of Congress right now, I think that was the right thing to do. But he is going to have to make compromises that will irritate a lot of people in both the Senate Republican and House Republican caucuses.
The president said today that he is also seeking bipartisanship on infrastructure and DACA, the program that kept 800,000 young undocumented immigrants from deportation. The president said we don't want to forget about DACA. Lauren.
Mark, I was watching today as the White House press secretary made a provocative comment comparing Donald Trump's bipartisan efforts to date with President Obama's.
That's right. Sarah Sanders said that President Trump has done more for bipartisanship in the last 8 days than former President Obama did in 8 years.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. A longtime conservative commentator and frequent guest on News Nightly is joining the White House. Mercedes Schlapp will serve as a senior advisor for strategic communications. It's just one of many changes in the communications department since the start of the administration. Schlapp, who is also a Catholic, is a former Fox News contributor and is married to Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union. 6 patients at a sweltering nursing home die in Hurricane Irma's aftermath, highlighting new hazards in the wake of the storm.
What we've seen is something extremely tragic. It points to the
Investigators believe the deaths were heat-related. Surviving patients are being treated for dehydration. 9.5 million people, just under half of Florida's population, are without power. Damage is being addressed in the Florida Keys, where 90% of the homes sustained damage. The president took to tweeting this morning saying, "I will be traveling to Florida tomorrow to meet with our great Coast Guard, FEMA, and many of the brave first responders and others." The White House says he's traveling to the Naples area. Republican senators are making a last-ditch effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. Their new proposal includes pro-life protections. Former Senator Rick Santorum helped craft the compromise, which would also defund Planned Parenthood.
All this money now that's going into the insurance system to require people to have abortion coverage, none of the money will be able to be used for abortion. So it's a fundamental sea change on the issue of pro-life.
Santorum says the bill also balances other Catholic concerns like helping the poor. The Republican proposal shifts health care dollars back to the states instead of the federal government. Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders is promoting a counter plan which would expand Medicare to provide health insurance for all Americans. A group of Christians came from far and wide to pray on Capitol Hill for young immigrant dreamers. Their fate is in the hands of Congress. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi shares their story. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The countdown clock is ticking. President Trump says he'll dismantle DACA in 6 months. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer demands Republicans bring forth what's called the DREAM Act. It would allow dreamers to earn legal residence. And today they pray that dream becomes reality.
First time in D.C.
First time in D.C.
Lizeth Salazar-Clark finds herself swept up in the national debate over immigration.
This is the only country we know and we love, and we grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and I mean, in our hearts, we're American.
But her mom brought Lizeth to the United States illegally when she was just 3. Now she wants Congress to protect her and the nearly 800,000 other dreamers.
Because we faced violence, we faced the drug war in Mexico.
Lizeth takes her story to Speaker Paul Ryan's office, backed up by the prayers of these Protestant ministers.
We ask for your wisdom to open hearts, to make a difference.
Speaker Ryan agrees something must be done to help the dreamers, but he's also worried about border security.
So while we deal with DACA, which is something that the president has asked us to deal with in Congress, we also have to deal with the problem in the first place, securing our borders, enforcing our laws, so that we don't have another DACA problem 10 years down the road.
President Trump says the DACA program, which protects the young immigrants, will expire in 6 months unless Congress saves it.
Let us pray, oh God.
So prayers go up around the Capitol.
And we pray for our politicians.
Prayers for dreamers who fear being deported, like Valeria Ruiz-Guerra.
We're going to fight like we're fighting for our lives, because we're literally, that's what we're doing, fighting for a future. We're fighting to stay in the only country that we know.
Speaker Ryan says deporting these people isn't in our country's interest. He's meeting with Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi to talk about the issue. Pelosi says she's willing to negotiate on border security, that's a Republican ask, in exchange for protecting the dreamers. Lauren?
We've heard from bishops, including Cardinal Dolan of New York, who are staunchly supportive of these dreamers.
The U.S. Bishops' Conference top leaders have been meeting this week. They say they're disappointed in the president's decision to end DACA. They're urging Congress to find a permanent solution for these young people.
Correspondent Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. Mexico's top diplomat says his country is taking steps to ease the return of young immigrants from the U.S.
We will provide our diplomatic efforts and our legal support for them to fulfill the dream, which is to stay in America.
During a visit to Los Angeles yesterday, Mexico's Foreign Relations Secretary said the country is making it easier to transfer college credits and is creating a job bank for immigrants. Mexico will also provide legal assistance to them. North Korea threatens the United States and its allies once again today. The communist nation is denouncing a recent UN Security Council vote in response to its latest nuclear weapons test. Now, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is responding. He's spotlighting America's robust arsenal of nuclear weapons. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with details from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Mattis says he's now convinced the United States must keep all of its nuclear force, land-based missiles, nuclear submarines, and even missiles launched from planes. He says the key to avoiding war is maintaining an arsenal that will deter potential enemies like North Korea. And today, Secretary Mattis is taking a closer look at some of those weapons. The U.S. Secretary of Defense makes a visit to Ground Zero of American nuclear firepower, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota.
Welcome to our capsule.
It houses 15 launch control centers responsible for more than 100 land-based nuclear missiles and planes that can carry nuclear bombs, all at the ready 24/7. in case the president ever calls for a strike. The trip was already scheduled before a recent series of missile tests from North Korea. But it now has more significance, following a UN vote Monday for more sanctions against the reclusive regime. Earlier this week, Mattis praised the vote.
The United Nations Security Council spoke with one voice again, recognizing the global threat that DPRK, North Korea, constitutes.
South Korea, an American ally, is preparing for possible retaliation from Pyongyang by conducting fire drills with the U.S. military. North Korea calls those joint exercises radical and dangerous, claiming the U.S. is intent on invading their country. The U.S. military denies that.
U.S. Marines are always prepared for a fight. It doesn't really matter who's on there, and we do our best to not specify a particular enemy.
But it's clear the military is preparing just in case. The president saying there is still a long way to go to securing a peaceful Korean peninsula. Secretary Mattis continues his three-day trip tomorrow, traveling to Omaha, Nebraska. There he will talk with military officials about strategic deterrence. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is also talking with allies about North Korea today. He is in the UK to talk about the problems in both North Korea and Libya. Lauren?
Earlier, you mentioned South Korea and how it is dealing with North Korea after the UN vote. What are other countries doing?
Yes, Lauren, well, some countries are cutting off diplomatic ties with the North Koreans altogether. This week, Mexico kicked North Korea's ambassador out of their country, and other nations like Peru are also following in turn. Peru, in particular, just this week asked their North Korean ambassador, gave him 5 days to leave, and many have been expressing similar concerns like this after the rogue nation claimed to be testing a hydrogen bomb. Now, specifically, we can tell you that test has not been confirmed. Lauren?
Well, I'm sure this will be talked about ad nauseum at the UN, where you will be next week for the General Assembly. Thank you so much, correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the Pentagon. ISIS seems to be asking would-be fighters to head to the Philippines instead of Syria and Iraq. It's the latest sign the terror group is shifting recruiting methods. NBC reports a new ISIS video focuses on the Philippines, including vandalism of a Catholic church, and a group related to ISIS has been fighting already in the southern Philippines for months, where martial law is in effect. Hundreds of thousands are fleeing to Bangladesh to escape violence in Myanmar. At least 370,000 Rohingya Muslims have entered the neighboring country since the end of August. Officials say aid organizations are struggling to provide food and water. And a tragedy in Italy after an 11-year-old boy and his parents die after falling into a volcanic crater near Naples. Police say the boy wandered into an off-limit area and his parents tried to rescue him. Their bodies were removed from the crater today. The family's other child, a 7-year-old, survived. The crater is located in the Phlegraean Fields, a sprawling area of ancient volcanic craters, and it's frequented by Italian schoolchildren and tourists from around the world. A Chinese bishop is taken into custody by the government, who was taken into custody, has been found. Bishop Shoa Zuman is part of the underground church. That's the church recognized by the Vatican. In June, the Holy See mentioned the grave condition of the bishop. In an internet message, the bishop now says he's not sure whether or not he'll be able to return to his diocese after being in the hospital for surgery on his ear. Father Tom Uzananil, the Indian priest who was released yesterday after 18 months in captivity, meets with Pope Francis. Father Tom was flown to Rome last night to undergo medical tests. He met with Pope Francis today. He knelt in front of him, you can see, kissing his feet. He's clean-shaven now, which is a far cry from how he looked when he was pleading for his release on YouTube earlier this year. He was taken hostage when armed militants attacked a home in southern Yemen in March of 2016, killing 16, including 4 nuns. Father Tom's older brother tells an Indian newspaper, "Our prayers were finally heard." The Pope's top advisory team met this week in the Vatican. The Council of Cardinals is made up of 9 cardinals, including Cardinal O'Malley of Boston. Among the topics discussed, the possibility of increasing the number of lay people, including women and young people, to fill Vatican jobs normally held by priests. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, does this mean we're going to see major changes in the composition of all Vatican department staff?
This isn't something that's going to happen immediately, Lauren. It was just a discussion. This is a group of cardinals that provide advice to the Holy Father as he makes decisions in making changes to the Vatican and part of this reform process. So it's not something that was anything more than discussed at this point, but they spoke about Vatican staff that would be less clerical, they said, more international, with more women and young people.
Why is that important to have women, young people, international people on the staff?
It would be more representative of the church, I'm sure. There's no concrete reason given for this sort of a change, but it's something that's been brewing for a long time. Part of these discussions would also be, how do we pay for top experts to come and work here in the Vatican? The major plus side, beyond the expertise of the priests that come to work here with doctorates, with much experience and knowledge, is that they cost so little and they're also supported by their diocese. If you were to bring the same sort of an expert that's a layperson here, you have the family that's also living with them. You have many more expenses and many more costs. So that's something that it's going to take some major changes if they're actually going to be putting this into practice.
This group has met almost 24 times in the last 4+ years. Is this the culmination of their work?
I don't think we'll see a conclusion of their work anytime soon, Lauren. It actually seems like it's becoming more and more permanent as time goes on. They discuss issues about this reform process, but they also get updates from the different Vatican departments, and they continue to advise the Pope on matters that seem to be already concluded. So we also have to remember that the Pope comes from a Jesuit background, and as provincials, Jesuits have sort of committees that advise them on major decisions, and then they take the major decisions, just like the Pope does in this case. So I think we're going to see this for the duration of this pontificate.
This is a fascinating insight into the culture at the Vatican. Thank you so much. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Lauren.
And Pope Francis reflects on his recent trip to Colombia while sporting a black eye.
Speranza, questo popolo ha futuro.
The Pope said the desire for peace in the country is proof the violence of their past doesn't have the last word. In the audience today, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who is in Rome for meetings. The Holy Father's bruises on his face are getting a bit larger after he fell in Colombia when the Pope mobile came to a sudden stop. Coming up, an abortion clinic in Ohio is at the center of a state Supreme Court case. We'll talk about it with a Toledo pro-life group. The board of the Belgian Brothers of Charity announces it will continue to offer euthanasia to patients despite being ordered by the Vatican to stop. The group was given until the end of August to comply with the orders, which were approved by the Pope. In a statement, the group says it will continue to use euthanasia. This is against church teaching. You can read more about the Brothers of Charity and their refusal right now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. A man convicted of killing 2 people in back-to-back robberies in Ohio is put to death. The execution happened this morning after the U.S. Supreme Court denied an attempt to delay. Today's death was the state's second this year. And a case before the Ohio Supreme Court could shut down Toledo's last abortion clinic. Government attorneys asked the state's high court yesterday to override lower court rulings and uphold the health department's order to close Capital Care of Toledo. The issue, the clinic did not have a patient transfer agreement with a local hospital, which is mandated by law. Restrictions on abortion clinics in Ohio, passed by lawmakers over the last 6 years, have contributed to the closings of several clinics. Joining us now via Skype is Ed Sitter, Executive Director of Toledo Right to Life. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lauren.
The Ohio Department of Health says the abortion clinic does not meet the requirements of the law. What law is the clinic violating?
Well, in Ohio, there's a law that governs all ambulatory surgical facilities, and it says that they must have a transfer agreement with a local hospital. And currently, Capital Care Network does not have a ambulatory surgical relationship with a local hospital. They have one with the University of Ann Arbor in Michigan, which is 52 miles away.
Why is it important to have patient transfer agreements, and why wouldn't the clinic want to comply?
Well, it's not so much the clinic doesn't want to comply, it just can't find any of the hospitals in the area that is willing to partner with them in this arrangement.
Why not?
You know, I can't speak to the motives of the hospitals. I just have no idea what they're thinking. But both public and private, well, the public are prohibited by statute not to have a transfer agreement with a private entity like an abortion clinic. But the private ones, and there are quite a few in Northwest Ohio here, that would be considered local, they do not want to enter into a relationship with them. Maybe it's the nature of the business. I really don't know, Lauren.
Let's look at the bigger picture for Ohio. There are only 8 clinics left operating in the state, and it had twice that many in 2011. Could Ohio, as a result of this law and this decision, become abortion-free?
I don't know if it could become abortion-free, but I do know that if the courts uphold this ruling by the Ohio Department of Health, this will impact not only Toledo's clinic, but in all likelihood will affect Dayton's clinic.
And that means, therefore, that those two have to close.
Yep. Yes, that's correct.
So what's next? We're just waiting for something from the courts?
That is correct. Yesterday was the hearing. The oral arguments were given, and that's the last. There won't be any additional arguments presented before the court, and now we're just waiting. And it could be as little as a month. It could be. There's really no timetable, nothing compelling the court to render a decision by a certain time frame.
All right. Thank you for the update. Ed Sitter, Executive Director of Toledo Right to Life. Up next, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announces plans to change rules on campus sexual assault. We'll break down the issue. And a sister's helping hand. How one nun sawed her way through to help in the cleanup efforts in Florida. The Education Department is seeking to change federal rules on how college campuses handle sexual assault cases. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos wants to end the Obama administration's rules for investigating allegations of sexual violence on campus. DeVos believes the current system has failed students because it has pushed schools to overreach in how they handle cases.
With the heavy hand of Washington tipping the balance of her scale, the sad reality is that Lady Justice is not blind on campuses today.
DeVos continued, saying the Education Department will work to repeal the current approach with a workable, effective, and fair system. Mona Charen joins us now. She has written extensively on this topic and is a syndicated columnist and senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Can you explain what Betsy DeVos is trying to do?
She's trying to reverse some of the damaging regulations that the Obama administration Department of Education promulgated. And these were rules about sexual assault that forced universities to take a number of steps that denied due process in cases of sexual assault.
So what do you think that she needs to do? Why are these new regulations needed? And are they the right thing to do?
Those regulations have created havoc on campuses. They have created kangaroo courts in many instances. Students have had accusations lodged against them and have not been able to have the basics of due process, like the right to confront witnesses against them and introduce evidence and so forth. There are lower standards of proof now for a sexual assault, which is a serious, serious crime, than there are for, say, plagiarism charges.
Feminists are saying that women's rights are being steered in the wrong direction after this announcement, that this is going to hurt women. And there's also the argument that I know you and I have seen all the time where people say women are lying. So how do we balance these two?
Right. You cannot look at this in an ideologically rigid way. You have to say human beings are fallible, and you have to look at the honest situation here. We've created, with hookup culture and with the sexual revolution and with the excessive drinking that goes on college campuses, the perfect environment for not just regretted sex, but forced sex to happen. And it is happening. So I wouldn't deny that there is a problem. I just would say that the Obama administration rules didn't move us in the right direction because, as I mentioned, they skimped on the rights of the accused. That much having been said, even just reversing those rules will not eliminate this problem because it is so ingrained in the attitudes of administrators and academia that we have to treat all men as potential rapists and as presumed guilty. That they have said that even though the federal government may change its rules, they're going to continue with these tribunals and with these attitudes and the training that all freshmen undergo and all of that.
Thank you so much. This is a complicated issue.
It is.
And it really goes to the heart of, as you were saying, our culture and how our children are being taught to behave. Thank you so much. Mona Charen, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, tonight, as the cleanup continues in Florida from Hurricane Irma, one nun is doing some heavy lifting. When an off-duty Miami-Dade police officer drove by, he found Sister Margaret Ann buzzing along with a chainsaw in hand. She's the principal of Archbishop Carroll High School. She did this, as you can see, in full habit. Police say acts of kindness like this remind residents they are all part of the same community. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.